Attorney General Garland, on October 4th, you issued an unprecedented memo that involves the Department of Justice and the FBI and local school districts, local school boards, nothing like it in our country's history. It was based, you've testified, on this letter from the National School Board Association that we now know the White House was involved in writing. They've retracted the letter. They've apologized for the letter. They say they regret the letter, but you won't retract the memo and said earlier that you have no regrets. And you've defended yourself repeatedly today before this committee by saying, well, you're focused on violence. But now, of course, we've seen the memo from your own Justice Department advising state and local and other prosecutors about all of the different federal causes of action that they can bring against parents that are not about violence, they're about harassment and intimidation. I'm looking here at this memo. It identifies no fewer than 13 possible federal crimes involving harassment and intimidation, including making annoying phone calls. Do you think a parent who makes a phone call to a school board member that she has elected, that school board member deems annoying, should be prosecuted, General Garland?
No, I don't. And the Supreme Court has made quite clear that the word intimidation with respect to the constitutional protection is one that directs a threat to a person with the intent of placing the victim in fear of bodily harm or death. Prosecutors who investigate these cases know the Supreme Court's. This is a very famous leading case.
Prosecutors do, but parents don't, General Garland. Do you think that a parent who looks at the 13 different federal crimes that your Justice Department has identified they might be subject to and prosecuted for, like making annoying phone calls, do you think that they're going to feel that they're welcome to speak up at a school board meeting? How about this one? They could be prosecuted for using the internet, I guess that would be Facebook, in a way that might cause emotional distress to a victim. Is that a crime of violence?
Senator, I haven't seen the memo that you're
Why
talking
haven't
about,
you?
and I don't. Even from the description, it doesn't sound like it was addressed to parents. But if you
No, it wasn't addressed to parents. It was addressed to prosecutors. That's the problem. Why haven't you seen the memo?
I don't know why I haven't. I don't look at every. I do not get every memo that every U.S. attorney sends out. But if you're
wait a minute, don't. I just want to be sure I understand this. This is a memorandum that collects 13 different federal crimes parents could be charged with. It has United States Department of Justice on the top of it, and you're telling me you haven't seen it?
Who's the memo from, Senator?
The United States Department of Justice, United States Attorney for the District of Montana.
I have not seen a memo from the District of Montana.
Not high enough priority for you?
That's not the question. I don't.
It is the question. Answer my question. Is it not a high enough priority for you when you're threatening parents with 13 different federal crimes? These aren't crimes of violence. You've testified today you're focused on violence. That's not what your U.S. attorneys, they work for you. That's not what they're saying. You haven't seen it because it's not a high enough priority, or what?
Question of priority. No one has sent me that memo, so I haven't seen it.
What do you mean no one has sent you the memo? You run the United States Department of Justice, do you not?
There are 115,000 employees of the Department of Justice.
Indeed, and you are in charge of every one of them. And this was a sufficiently important case that you issued a memo. You, over your signature, issued a memo involving the FBI and the Department of Justice in local school boards, local school districts. Your U.S. attorneys are now threatening prosecution with 13 different crimes, but it's not a high enough priority for you. It got lost in the mix.
I'll send again. I've never seen that memo.
That's what concerns me, General Garland.
Well, it wasn't sent to me. I hope you will assure your constituents that what we are concerned about here is violence and threats of violence.
That only leads me to conclude, General Garland, all I can conclude from this is either that you're not in control of your own department, or that, more likely, what I think to be the case, is that you knew full well that this is exactly the kind of thing that would happen. When you issued your memo, when you involved the Department of Justice and all of its resources, and the FBI and all of its resources, and local school boards and local school districts, you knew that federal prosecutors would start collecting crimes that they could use against parents. You knew they would advise state and local officials that these are all of the ways parents might be prosecuted. You knew that that was the likely outcome, and that's exactly what's happened. And we're talking about parents like Scott Smith, who's behind me over my shoulder. This is a father from Loudoun County, Virginia. Here he is at a school board meeting. He was forcibly restrained. He was assaulted. He was arrested. Why? Because he went to an elected school board meeting. He's a voter, by the way. He went to an elected school board meeting to raise the fact that his daughter was assaulted, sexually assaulted, in a girl's restroom by a boy. This is what happened to him. Now, you testified last week before the House that you didn't know anything about this case. I find that extraordinary because the letter that you put so much weight on, the letter that's now been retracted, it cites this case. It cites Mr. Scott's case directly. There's a news article cited in the letter. It's discussed in the letter, but you testified you just couldn't remember it. Maybe this will refresh your memory. Do you think people like Scott Smith, do you think parents who show up to complain about their children being assaulted ought to be treated like this man right here?
Parents who show up to complain about school boards are protected by the First Amendment.
Do you think that they ought to be prosecuted
They
in
are
the different
protected.
ways that your U.S. attorneys are identifying?
If what they're doing is complaining about what the school board is doing, policies, curriculum, anything else that they want to, as long as they're not committing threats of violence, then they should not be prosecuted, and they can't be.
Let me ask you about this. Several of my Democrat colleagues have today, just today in this hearing, multiple times have compared parents who show up at school board meetings, like Mr. Smith here, have compared them to criminal rioters. You think that's right? You think that a parent who shows up at a school board meeting, who has a complaint, who wants to voice that complaint, and maybe she doesn't use exactly the right grammar, you think they're akin to criminal rioters? Do you agree with that?
I do not, and I do not remember any senator here making that comparison.
Oh, really? These people are just like the folks who came here on January 6th and in the riot at the Capitol?
I don't think they were referring to the picture that you're showing there.
Well, I certainly would hope not, but they were referring to parents who go to school board meetings. Mr. Smith is a parent who went to a school board meeting. I'll leave it at this, General Garland. You have weaponized the FBI and the Department of Justice. Your U.S. attorneys are now collecting and cataloging all the ways that they might prosecute parents like Mr. Smith because they want to be involved in their children's education and they want to have a say in their elected officials. It's wrong. It is unprecedented, to my knowledge, in the history of this country, and I call on you to resign. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Cruz.
Hawley?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Monaco, I want to come back to this extraordinary letter and memorandum that the Attorney General of the United States issued yesterday. Practically every day brings new reports about this administration weaponizing the federal bureaucracy to go after political opponents. Frankly, I don't think we've ever seen anything like it in American history. I mean, for those of us who missed the McCarthy era, I guess this president is intent on bringing it to us, but with new force and new power and new urgency, unlike anything we've ever seen. Are you aware of any time in American history when an attorney general has directed the FBI to begin to intervene in school board meetings, local school board meetings?
I'm not aware, and I'm not aware that is not going on. Let me be very,
Really,
very
this
clear.
isn't about local school board meetings? That's not the subject of the memorandum? I thought that was in the memorandum.
The memorandum is quite clear. It's one page, and it asks the U.S. attorney community and the FBI special agents in charge to convene state and local law enforcement partners to ensure that there's an open line of communication to address threats, to address violence, and that's the appropriate role of the Department of Justice to make sure that we are addressing criminal conduct and violence.
At local school board meetings, let me just ask you this. Is parents waiting sometimes for hours to speak at a local school board meeting to express concerns about critical race theory or the masking of their students, particularly young children? Is that in and of itself, is that harassment and intimidation? Is waiting to express one's view at a school board meeting harassment and intimidation?
As the Attorney General's memorandum made quite clear, spirited debate is welcome, is a hallmark of this country. It's something we all should engage in. And
No, I don't
be
think so,
free
Ms.
to
Monaco. With
engage
all
in.
due respect, it didn't make it quite clear. It doesn't define those terms, nor does it define harassment or intimidation. It talks about violence. I think we can agree that violence shouldn't be condoned or looked aside from in any way, swept under the rug at all. But harassment and intimidation, what did those terms mean in the context of a local school board meeting? I mean, this seems to, in the First Amendment context, we talk about the chill to speech. If this isn't a deliberate attempt to chill parents from showing up at school board meetings for their elected school boards, I don't know what is. I mean, I'm not aware of anything like this in American history. We're talking about the FBI You're using the FBI to intervene in school board meetings. That's extraordinary.
Senator, I have to respectfully disagree. That is not what
Point me to an instance.
the Attorney General's memorandum made quite clear that violence is not appropriate. Spirited public debate on a whole range of issues is absolutely what this country is all about.
Then why is it being investigated by the FBI?
It is not. When and if any situation turns to violence, then that is the appropriate role of law enforcement to address it.
The memorandum covers more than violence. It talks about intimidation. It talks about harassment. So I'm asking you to draw some lines. We do this all the time in the First Amendment context. This is the sum and substance of First Amendment law, so I expect that you'll be available and willing to do it now. Tell me where the line is with parents expressing their concerns, waiting for hours in these school board meetings. We've all seen the videos. This happened in my state. Parents have waited for hours. Sometimes the school board meetings have been ended before they can speak because the school board doesn't want to hear it. And now parents are told that if they wait and they express their views, that they may be investigated for intimidation?
I don't know who's telling them that, Senator. The job of the Justice Department is to investigate crimes. When a situation turns to violence, when and if a situation turns to violence, it's the job of the Justice Department and local law enforcement to address that. The Attorney General's memorandum simply asked the U.S. Attorney community, the FBI, and their counterparts to ensure that state and local law enforcement has an open line of communication to report threats, whether they happen in the context of election officials being threatened, whether they happen in the context of members of Congress being threatened, which the FBI responds to on a regular basis, as is appropriate. The job of the Justice Department is to address criminal conduct.
You know, all I can say is this is truly extraordinary. I think you know it is. It's unprecedented. You can't point to a single instance where anything like this has happened before. And I think parents across this country are going to be stunned to learn, stunned, that if they show up at a local school board meeting, by the way, where they have the right to appear and be heard, where they have the right to say something about their children's education, where they have the right to vote, and you are attempting to intimidate them. You are attempting to silence them. You are attempting to interfere with their rights as parents and, yes, with their rights as voters. This is wrong. This is dangerous. And I cannot believe that an Attorney General of the United States is engaging in this kind of conduct. And frankly, I can't believe that you are sitting here today defending it. I intend to get answers to these questions. You won't answer my questions. I'm going to get answers to these questions. Mr. Chairman, we need to have a hearing on this subject. We need to hear from the Attorney General himself. He needs to come here, take the oath, sit there, and answer questions. We have never seen anything like this before in our country's history. And frankly, I want to say I think it is a dangerous, dangerous precedent.
This hearing on Violence Against Women Act will continue. Senator Coons.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you for being here, Mr. Secretary. I want to talk about the policies that have gotten us to where we are with our effectively open border. But let me first ask you about this. You said as recently as this week that the border is closed. Is that still your position today? Border is closed?
Yes, it is.
Don't you think you bear any responsibility for the current crisis by telling the world earlier this year that the border was open? Your words were, we're not telling you not to come. We're just telling you that we're putting a system back in place in which you can come. I mean, don't you think people took your words at face value then?
Senator, I've never said that the border is open, and I've never believed...
We're not telling you not to come. How would you parse that?
Senator, I've never said that the border is open, and I've never believed that it should be an open border. We have laws that Congress has passed that are laws of accountability and also laws of humanitarian relief.
You did say that we're not telling you not to come, though, right? You said that. You remember that?
I'm sorry, Senator. I apologize.
You remember saying, don't you, that we're not telling you not to come. Those are your words that you said in a press conference. You said that, right?
I don't recall saying that. I don't believe...
You don't recall saying that?
That's correct, Senator. I've never said...
We'd be happy to refresh your memory for you and some questions for the record. I'm sure that is interesting news, and I'm sure everyone will... The Secretary's just said he doesn't have any memory of making those comments. That's extraordinary.
Senator, I have never said that the border is open.
Let me ask you about this. CBP data says that the agency had 178,000 enforcement encounters at the southern border in April. It's the highest in 2 decades. Of that total, what percentage were subject to immediate expulsion?
I will get that data to you. I don't have that at my disposal this morning.
Is it 100%? Is it 60%? Is it 20%? Do you have any idea?
100% of families and single adults are subject to expulsion, except for those with acute vulnerabilities, and we exercise that discretion. However, our ability to actually expel families under CDC's Title 42 authority is limited by, for example, Mexico's ability and capacity, I should say, to receive the expelled families, and that is what we are addressing as a result.
Okay, I think the number is around 60% or so are subject to immediate expulsion, which means we have a very large percentage of migrants who were permitted entry into the United States and are still here. But we'll give that question again to you for the record so that you can go and look it up. Let me ask you this. Why is it that this week, actually late last night, it was reported that CBP terminated a flight program that transferred families across the southern border for purposes of expelling them under Title 42. These flights were apparently canceled due to the pressure of left-wing groups. Is that accurate?
Senator, we make our decisions as we consider to be most effective in furtherance of our mission and not because of pressure by outside groups. I'd be pleased to look into the cancellation of the lateral flights and respond to you after I've done so.
So you're telling me here that the ACLU had no role in the termination of these expulsion flights? Is that your testimony?
Senator, we are addressing the claims of the ACLU. The ACLU has claimed that our exercise of the CDC's Title 42 authority is not supported by the law, and we are working with the ACLU, actually adverse to the ACLU.
You're working with them, though?
If I may, Senator, we are adverse to the ACLU.
But you're working with them in this program? Is that why you canceled it?
If I may finish, Senator, we are adverse to the ACLU in litigation with respect to the legal authority underpinning our exercise of the CDC's Title 42 authority.
Right, but they had a role in terminating this. You're working with them in the termination of these expulsion flights.
Senator, the decisions with respect to expulsion flights are ours because of the decisions that we have made based on the reasons that we think are necessary to execute on our mission.
Well, I think the fact that you're working with them is interesting news, so that's also quite relevant. We'll give you this information as a question for the record.
Senator, they're suing us and we're defendants. That's not what
I'm just quoting back what you just said. You just said that we're working with them. The news reports indicate that you've canceled these flights at their behest. You and I both know that there can be such a thing as friendly litigation, Mr. Secretary. I mean, let's not pretend otherwise. I'm just repeating your own words to you. We'll give this to you as a question for the record so that you can look into it more further. I think that's interesting news. Let me ask you about why you canceled the Safe Third agreements with the governments of El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras. These are agreements negotiated by the previous administration that the president canceled once he came into office. The president says that he's an avowed multilateralist, and yet one of the first things he did was to tear up these international agreements with other countries. How can you address the root causes of migration, as you keep talking about, if you're going to tear up international agreements that try to address these problems?
So I will answer your question and make one comment before I do so. I've been a lawyer now for 35 or so years. Friendly litigation is a phenomenon with which I'm completely unfamiliar.
Really? You're not familiar? Wait a minute. You're not familiar with an outside group bringing litigation against the government that the government then accedes to in order to change the law? You've never heard of that phenomenon?
Senator, I'm not familiar with friendly litigation. As a federal prosecutor, I was a strong advocate for the United States government in the pursuit of criminal accountability.
You've never heard wait, this is interesting, and you just brought it up. You've never heard of a regulatory lawsuits in which outside groups bring suits against the federal government. The government then agrees to settle the suit or to change its rules, and it reaches a settlement that is favored, that the government actually wants to achieve. You've never heard of that before?
Senator, I've heard of resolutions of litigation. I've heard of settlements of litigation. I've heard of arbitration. I've heard of mediation. Friendly litigation, the commencement of friendly litigation is something with which I'm unfamiliar. The reason why the the safe third country agreements were terminated is because there was nothing safe about them.
I'm sorry, by which you mean what?
Senator, to have an individual fleeing persecution from Guatemala and considering Honduras a safe third country is actually empirically incorrect. Because, and we can take a look at the migration from Honduras and the number of people leaving Honduras for fear of persecution, and that is not our concept of a safe third country.
It's not your concept. So you think it's wise policy to come into office to terminate these international agreements based on your judgment about these other countries without consultation with them, apparently, and then we see this massive spike. Would you say that the children who have come to the United States and have gone through the border crossing, have had to do who knows what for the cartel, are more safe because of your actions? Do you think that you put them in less danger because of the agreements that you terminated and the opportunities to seek asylum and then wait in a third country you've denied to them? Do you think that your actions have made the situation better?
Senator, you've gone over your time. But
Could I get an answer to that question?
Yes, oh, absolutely. So, Secretary, you may answer that question, but be respectful of our three other members that are waiting.
The safe third country agreements, in my opinion, put children in harm's way.
Thank you, Senator Hawley. Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to all of the witnesses for being here. Mr. Chipman, if I could just start with you. Since leaving the ATF, you've served as a policy advisor or provided support for, I think, just about every national gun control group in the country or close to it: the Brady Campaign to Prevent Gun Violence, the Coalition to Stop Gun Violence, Mayors Against Illegal Guns, and most recently the Giffords Group. My question is, given your policy bias, and you clearly have a very distinct policy point of view, you alluded to this with Senator Cruz a moment ago, how can America's hundreds of millions of law-abiding gun owners have confidence that you won't try to restrict their Second Amendment rights if you're confirmed as ATF director? I mean, what assurances can you give them that you will limit your efforts to criminals who misuse weapons and leave law-abiding firearms owners to themselves?
Senator, thank you for this question because it's really important. As I've said, for 25 years, I enforced the law in the books. Every day, me and other federal agents tried to catch the bad guys. I mean, that's what the mission was. It was trying to keep the public safe. During those 25 years, I saw gaps in the law that really prevented us from doing the job I knew the American public wanted us to do. Look at that 25 years. I was not going wayward with law-abiding gun owners. I never received a complaint of that sort. And I'm prepared to return to that job. But my passion after leaving ATF was to make ATF and our enforcement of gun laws more effective to keep us all safe. I understand if I'm confirmed, I will have to earn the confidence and your respect and trust to keep doing that.
Let me ask you about some of your work for the Giffords Group. In the landmark U.S. Supreme Court case, District of Columbia versus Heller, which was handed down when I was actually working at the U.S. Supreme Court, the Giffords Law Center that year, if memory serves, authored an amicus brief arguing that there is no individual right to own a firearm under the Second Amendment. The Supreme Court famously found otherwise. Do you share your employer's belief that the Second Amendment does not protect an individual right to keep and bear firearms?
Thank you for your question, Senator. I do not. I'm a gun owner. I respect that the Supreme Court has recognized this right. And if ATF director, I will ensure to uphold that right.
Very good. So you think Heller was rightly decided, just to be clear about this?
Senator, I'm a cop, not a lawyer. What I know is the law is the law, and the Supreme Court plays a role in recognizing what those rights are. As an agent, I felt like we were going down a highway. Our mission was to prevent crime, and the Constitution were those guardrails to keep us in line. And at times, when the road was uncertain, we had signposts, and those were attorneys who we asked advice and counsel. And so if confirmed as ATF director, that's the balance that I would strike. But the bottom line is our job is to prevent crimes from apparently is ongoing right now that other members have suggested. And that would be my sole duty.
Well, I just want to be clear on this because you said that you do think that the Constitution supports, protects the individual right to keep and bear arms. That was the holding of Heller. You've been a policy advocate now for quite a number of years, and I think that your views, and you've discussed some of them today, are fair game. So I just want to be clear on this. You think Heller was rightly decided. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. Thank you. That's helpful. Let me ask you about something you said in 2012. In an interview, I think it was on MSNBC, you said that the Secret Service should not carry guns. You said their whole rule is to cover and evacuate, and you went on to say possibly we need to think of strategies like that in schools. Is that still your view?
Senator, I trust that you have and your staff have actually picked something I've said. I do not believe I ever said that. I might have said this, which is I was trained to work with the Secret Service, and I have observed that part of that training is that you have to get your body in between you and the person you're protecting, and you often don't have the opportunity to even draw your gun. That is something that I would say. I have never advocated that the Secret Service should not carry guns, ever.
Do you mean to suggest then that schools should have unarmed guards, that they shouldn't be able to protect students with firearms? I mean, I'm trying to understand the import of your comments.
Senator, thank you for the question about schools. I mean, this is something that we've all debated and tried to figure out a solution to the mass violence we've seen in schools. We know how to keep buildings safe. I came in one today. I do not believe that the best approach is to arm people to win gunfights in schools.
So you're opposed then to having armed guards in schools? You think that they shouldn't be armed?
As an advocate and as a firearms expert, I've rendered my opinion that I believe that there are better ways to secure schools. If I'm confirmed as ATF director, largely this is not going to be the focus of ATF. Our focus would be to prevent people who would do harm at schools from ever getting guns in the first place. Hopefully that addresses the question as you've asked.
Wouldn't that just leave the guards who are there, the law enforcement who are there, to act as human shields? I mean, is that essentially your view?
Senator, no, it's not, and I'm sorry if I'm not explaining this correctly. We came into a building today secured so that guns would not be brought in. I'm more a believer of hardening targets so that guns could never enter a school. So that armed people inside would not be faced with other armed people. So, metal detectors is something used in some schools, and I've suggested that that's a possible, view that states and localities will have to make for themselves.
I do have some additional questions for you, which I'm happy to give to you for the record, as well as we'll give to you for the record your comments in that 2012 interview that I referred to and give you a chance to follow up more fully on that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Senator Hawley. Senator Cotton.